Good morning. I'm John Masserini, Senior Research Analyst for Tag Cyber. Today, as part of Tag Cyber's Executive Exchange, I'm here with Brad Hibbert, the Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Operations Officer for Prevalent. Brad, great to see you again, and welcome to Tag.
Oh, thanks, John. Great to be in town and glad to be here today.
Wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about third party. Over the last several years, we've seen a shift in how third parties are addressed and the risks that occur within the enterprises. Originally, we used to worry about access control, trying to get a vulnerability scan done on a third party, or even, on a good day, we got a SOC 2 report. Very different world now with supply chain issues and all the extended third party challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in the industry and where it's going?
Yeah, sure, John. So over the last few years, you've seen some dynamic changes in the industry. As you mentioned, I think vendor risk management started years back, focusing on IT vendors and access control. So those folks that are accessing or processing or storing data with the system. And I think we've seen a bit of a shift since then. I think some of this was driven by just the recent events with COVID, right? So business resilience has certainly come up more and more. I think we're also seeing a lot of pressures on boards from consumers and from shareholders on non-IT related risks associated with ESG or diversity or modern slavery. So that's really causing organizations to take pause and think about sort of the broader dimensions of risks that are associated with these third parties. Don't get me wrong, I think IT security controls are still top of mind. We recently did a third-party study, research study, and 45% of the respondents still indicated that IT controls are their primary concern. But what's interesting is that 40% also indicated that non-IT risks are of concern as well. So I think people are trying to get a more comprehensive understanding of risk throughout that vendor relationship and put processes and plans in place to mitigate that risk throughout that relationship.
Yeah, so let's dig into that a little bit. So as a previous CISO, we were heavily focused on the IT-centric risks and the risks that applications and all that brought into the organization, which kind of just by default extended into the third-party realm. Now with the ESG stuff, with the modern slavery, and all of the other expanse of risk, a lot of CISOs are kind of struggling a little bit with how that fits into their programs, right? When it comes to the industry, how are we adapting, right? How are CISOs really kind of growing with that and being able to absorb that into their programs?
So thanks, John. I think, as I mentioned, buyers are getting more sophisticated in their asks. So looking at non-IT related risks. So I think what organizations are looking at now is putting programs in place that they can start with a certain type of control and risk. Maybe it's IT security risk where many programs start. But how do you layer in and get visibility over that more comprehensive risk profile, right? So for example, from a procurement perspective, I think we're seeing a lot more demand for things about pre-screening, things around sanctions, of course, things around business reputational risk. Although it might not have a direct impact or requirement around compliance, we're seeing a lot of pressures on these organizations from consumers, from activist shareholders, for example, asking them to do better in these areas. So what we've done is we've taken a look at who in the organization is interacting with that vendor at those different phases of the life cycle, which types of risks do they need to address, and then we've built some capabilities to help them understand that risk and minimize those challenges and mitigate those concerns throughout that vendor process or that life cycle.
So from a security technology perspective, we always used to rate, just find ways to rate risks, whether it's vulnerabilities with CVSS, and so you're doing that same kind of thing for those non-technology centric risks, right? So
yeah,
we can go and sit in front of a board and say, here's the technology side, here's the reputational side with the environmental, social, governance stuff. That's kind of the all-in-one solution you're referring to.
Yeah, that's right. So we'll gather the information and give you a comprehensive understanding of risk across those different risk dimensions, and we do that through a number of different ways. As you mentioned, there's sort of that outside-in view. So you're looking at vulnerability scans, we're looking at business reputational risk, we're looking at financial risk, we're looking at the different sanctions, so we're monitoring that data, kind of bringing that in. We have the assessment capability for that inside out, understanding our policies and procedures and asking for artifacts. And then we complement that by building up the profile with additional information so that we can get from sort of a global sensors, if you will. So pulling in things about the demographics of the vendor, fourth-party relationships that vendor may have. As I mentioned, ESG information comes in, and then we package that all up and put that into a comprehensive profile that the business can understand.
So when you look at your typical user, is it really the security team, or is it more of a wider breadth? Right. You mentioned the integration of security and procurement. Right. That's always been. I think there's always been a challenge there in all of the organizations I've worked for, finding that balance between really what the security team wants to do and helping and getting that information early in the procurement lifecycle. Right, has been a big part of the challenge. So bringing this together seems like you're addressing a lot of those risks, but it also sounds like you're opening up this to many more people in the organization, not just the security team.
That's right. Many of the programs start with the security team, and again, I go back to 45% of our respondents indicate that's the primary concern. I'd also say that many organizations are concerned about security because the third-party data breaches have certainly accelerated, as you know, over the last couple of years. I think in our research, we show that about 45% of our respondents indicated that they've been impacted somehow by a third-party data breach. Now, that might not be an impact just on their IT vendors. That could be just another type of supplier that was impacted by a security breach. And that's up from about 21% in 2020. So we're certainly seeing a real shift in attackers going after that supply chain. So that's really driving the awareness. So that tends to be the foundation of the program, getting that security risk in place. And traditionally, people using our solutions or building off of our solutions have been CISOs and security teams. But again, what we're starting to see now is a bit of a convergence. We're seeing security teams on the IT vendors being asked to have a more comprehensive understanding of risk. We're seeing procurement teams who typically used to deal with quality and delivery and financial risk, now being asked to do things around diversity and modern slavery, ESG. Again, these things that are being driven by the shareholders and just the consumers, right? But we're also seeing the supply side, the procurement guys asking about IT risks with their non-IT vendors as well, because they can also be impacted by data breaches that could impact their ability to deliver a service or a product. And so we really see a convergence happening, right, where these procurement teams are starting to ask for more information around the non-IT vendors around security. Security teams focused on IT vendors asked to do more than just the IT vendors, but to do assessments around normal suppliers around IT risks. So it's really starting to come together. And so from a buying perspective, we're seeing, whereas a few years ago, 95% of who we were interacting with were CISOs, now we're seeing about 75%. And about 25% of our interactions, we're seeing teams that are more thoughtful about the programs, that the CISOs are certainly there kind of driving a lot of the decision making, but procurement, contract management, others are coming to the table to make sure that they're going to get what they need as these programs begin to mature and expand over time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I know that recently the SEC has put a lot of focus on the third-party risk and all of the issues that surround third and, as you mentioned, fourth-party risk. Right? There's, I think that's often overlooked is we kind of don't look past that vendor, that partner, and not the partners that they rely on. Right?
Exactly.
Certainly in the telecom world, that fourth-party vendor is super critical, right?
That's right.
I might be buying a device from a trusted source, but who knows where that trusted source got those chips from or those boards from or something along those lines, right? So that fourth party is super critical. So how can Prevalent, overall help my team, procurement team, privacy and legal team address some of these SEC requirements or other regulatory requirements that are coming down the line?
Yeah, sure. So again, we have a SaaS platform that really focuses on third-party risk management. So having that unified place to get that comprehensive understanding of risk. And what we've done is we've gone back and we've looked at every team that interacts with that third party throughout that vendor relationship, from sourcing to selection, to contracting and onboarding, to due diligence and remediation, to continuous monitoring and validation, to offboarding and terminating the contract, to understand what are the risks involved with each of those steps, who's interacting with that third party, and making sure that we can provide them what they need from that comprehensive risk profile, but do that in a way through a lens that's important to them in their job function. And so we have a program that goes out and does that, consolidates that information, automates the process, and fosters collaboration across those teams. The idea is to kind of move beyond just the compliance checkbox, if you will. So every team can thoughtfully and purposefully think about how they're interacting with that third party to mitigate risks. And at the end of the day, if they can amplify that through all these different teams, then at the end of the day, they can meaningfully reduce the overall risk associated with that third party throughout that contract. So you have a process that does that, so a platform that does that. In addition to that, the market's still somewhat immature. So we provide what we think is the whole product experience. So for customers that need it, we also have services. We have a services team. We have a lot of service partners out there that can help with program design, program implementation, program optimization. We've done this for people on our team that have done this well over 20 years and have learned some best practices. So for teams that need to kind of allow somebody else to do the hard work, we have a managed services team that can help, just kind of help you scale that program with the level of quality that you're looking at, and then provide a customer success program to kind of backstop that whole thing. So really for us, it's about helping you kind of understand what your program needs are, start small, show some success, and then grow that over time. Maybe as you're growing that program, start to understand additional levels of risk or dimensions of risk and incorporate different team members and departments into the program as you scale over time. And then make sure you have the necessary support that you need to make sure the program's successful.
Nice. Sounds like we're getting rid of a lot of spreadsheets.
Yeah. And then again, go back to, I talk about what we're seeing in the market, but there's a lot of people out there today that still use spreadsheets.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're hitting a wall. They find that they can't scale. Or as they try to, kind of grow beyond their IT vendors to this broader set of suppliers, they can't scale. As they try to understand this broader set of risks beyond kind of the annual security check, if you will, they can't scale. And as they try to move beyond this, point in time assessment to have a continuous understanding of that vendor profile and that vendor risk profile, they can't scale. So certainly a lot of companies out there struggling, and companies like ours are around to help them through that.
Yeah, and that's great. And we can't have a conversation about risk and security and not talk about the challenges of the industry just in hiring and resources, right? So any solution that can help us manage our resources that we actually do have better seems just completely positive win as far as I'm concerned. So
that's right. Yeah.
One of I'd really like to dig in a little bit to moving beyond the compliance, right? Moving beyond the checkbox.
Right.
That's historically been a problem in security where many times non-security people feel, oh, we're compliant, so we're secure, right? In the third-party risk world, how do we manage that moving down that path, right? Moving from, oh, we've passed a compliance checkbox,
right,
to actually resolving the issues with our third-party partners.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, so a couple of things. I think one is that, as you mentioned, a lot of people do these yearly assessments, and it comes back and it indicates, here's you got some levels of risk, and they kind of file that away and say, I've done my assessment, and move on. So I think having products that leverage automation and some intelligence that can understand what those risks are. So as those questionnaires are coming back, or as those events are happening, they can take those events and those points, and they can convert those into risks with some sort of quantification and some sort of business context around that. And then they can have automation that actually provides prescriptive guidance to clients about what they should do to remediate that risk. So if you were going to remediate that risk, what should you do? What should you talk to the vendor about, right? So I think that's certainly, having that prescriptive package guidance certainly would be helpful, and certainly something that we provide. I think for a lot of companies, if they don't have the time to interact with the vendors, then don't be afraid to look at a managed service or somebody that can augment your team to help you do that. So first you have the prescription, so the playbook to how to remediate the work. And then there's actually going the next step, which is actually doing the remediation, right? So if you don't have the team to do it, then you can certainly, find somebody that can help you with that or augment your team. I also think that's a great reason why a lot of people need automation and on the front end. A lot of people spend a lot of their time gathering the data, getting vendors to respond, going out and collecting the data. But if that can all be automated for you, that means you can spend more of your time on the hard stuff on the back end, which is doing the remediation. So I think trying to automate, trying to outsource, trying to do whatever you need to do to simplify that front end of the experience so you can focus more time on performing the remediation and getting the prescriptive guidance around that would be certainly helpful. I think that's another reason I think that these shared intelligence networks or shared exchanges are pretty handy, right? They do a lot of the pre-collection for you, collating that information up front, so your team doesn't have to do that. So then you can spend more time on the remediation side as well. And certainly we've seen that be very successful in certain verticals, particularly where you have a third-party concentration. So for example, we have a shared network in legal, we have a shared network in healthcare. So when we get a new healthcare provider as a customer or a new legal provider as a customer, the chances are we have a lot of that information already in our database, so they can focus more of their time on actually doing that remediation work. So does that make sense? Yeah,
absolutely. And just out of curiosity, are there more exchanges coming up? Right. I mean, you mentioned legal and healthcare. I can imagine financials would be a prime target and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so we have a general exchange as well. So just for cross industries, but we continue to work with different industry groups. A lot of that's going to be the immaturity of the market itself, because the verticals have to decide on what's the standard content going to be. What are the standard best practices going to be. So we are working on a few. I think some great ideas would be, as you mentioned, financials. I think. Auto sector, retail sector, there's certainly a lot of opportunity, and when the market's ready, we're certainly going to be there to help them through those transitions.
Well, thank you very much. Any kind of closing thoughts that you would like to share, or just talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I guess some tidbits of wisdom that we've learned over the years. I guess one thing is, if organizations are looking to take on this problem domain of third-party risk management, there's solutions and people out there to help. I think if people are looking at a program, they should think about the long-term, kind of what they want to get out of that program long-term. They could start small and kind of grow into that, and they need to get a good foundation in place. I think that people should think about moving beyond the compliance checkbox. I think that they really do need to think about mitigating risks. So you and I have a lot of experience with, as you mentioned, vulnerability and access management. It's all about reducing the attack surface, if you will. So I think organizations need to be thoughtful about trying to actually move beyond the compliance checkbox to reducing risk. I think that this point in time thing, it's kind of like vulnerability management, right?
Exactly.
They got to look at more continuously understanding what that risk profile looks like and how it's changing over time.
Right.
And I also think that there's a lot of people out there that can help. So solutions like ours can certainly, and partners can certainly help them through that learning cycle and get them up and running and get them the efficiencies and quality they're looking for.
No, fantastic. Sounds like an outstanding solution. So thank you very much for coming out today. I really do appreciate spending some time, and look forward to more discussions.
Thanks, John. It's been great.
Thank you.